Bismillahir-Rahmanir-Rahim. Certainly Allah's deen is Islam. 3. 19. What is Islam? Translation of Islam Kiya Hai. What did Allah say? The Quranic perspective. Ghulam Ahmed Parwez 1964. Talui Islam Trust. Registered. 25B, Gulberg 2, Lahore. 12. The political system. When human beings began living together, their interests clashed with each other. From these clashes, mutual conflicts emerged. As a result of this, the need was felt for a solution to be devised which would prevent this from occurring. So that if a conflict did arise, these mutual frictions and clashes could be amicably resolved so that society could remain protected from wars and turmoil. The concept of a political system started from this. The beginning arose from this need. But those people who undertook responsibility for conflict resolution and decision-making, perceived that getting others to obey their orders gives rise to great pleasure. Therefore, they started to devise those techniques through which the power which had come into their hands was not snatched away. As a consequence, two classes emerged within society. One class was that which got their orders obeyed by others, and the second class was the one which obeyed these orders of theirs. Sometimes, to seize authority and rule from the governing class, another rival group would stand up. And it would sometimes even be the case that the ruled class became prepared to rebel against the governing class. 12.1 Struggle between the rulers and the ruled. If you look closely, you will find that the whole history of mankind is a tale of this struggle, i.e. the effort of the ruling class was that the chains of their authority and rule keep becoming ever tighter and stronger. The desire of the opposing class was that government should fall into their hands. The effort of the ruling class was to keep suppressed any rebellion by the ruled class. And the effort of the people possessing vision and wisdom was, what solution can be devised so that both the political system remains in position, and there is also no conflict between ruler and ruled in society. Before we examine the solution which the Quran presents for this problem, it is necessary that certain important pieces of this story are brought to the fore. And it should also be seen what kind of efforts and attempts were made in this regard by men of intellect and vision. 12.2 Tribal System of Government. In the beginning, man lived a tribal life, i.e. members of one family all lived together. This was called their tribe. The elder of the tribe was considered worthy of respect, therefore the responsibility for solving mutual conflicts was his. His decision was to be obeyed by everyone. With the passage of time, the desire to also govern began to awaken in the hearts of these elders of the family, and they started to think of ways in which to retain and sustain their rule. To achieve this, the belief was invented that obedience of the elders was compulsory in all circumstances, i.e. it was essential that the elders should be approached for decisions on all matters, not only for children, but for any man no matter at what stage in life he was. These verdicts of the elders used to gradually transform into tribal culture and tradition, contravention of which was considered a severe crime. In this way, obedience of both categories of elders, whether alive or dead, used to become such an obligation against which no individual could transgress. This was the first phase of government. 12.3 Belief in divine authority. In the early life of man, priests enjoyed a very high status. Even now, wherever ignorance and superstition is prevalent, priests are worshipped. They were considered holders of supernatural powers and the offspring of gods or their deputies. Every individual was fearful of them and trembled, and could not allow even the passing thought in his heart of opposing any of their commands. These religious priests took advantage of the veneration of the people and extended their sphere of control beyond the four walls of their places of worship to the palaces of worldly government. For this, they invented the belief that they are the possessors of divine rights, i.e. God has created them in order to govern, and their orders are the orders of God Himself. Obedience to them is obedience of God, and disobedience to them is the disobedience of God, the penalty of which is both exemplary punishment in this world and consignment to hell in the next life. When worldly leaders saw that this is an extremely easy and successful technique by which to gain obedience of the public, because by this rule is over hearts and souls rather than over bodies, for which neither police nor armies are required, they joined forces with the priesthood. In this way, Raja, a dictator, or a king, as God's shadow on earth, started having his orders and wishes obeyed as if they were the orders of God. The self-created religion of men provided great strength to this type of rule. The blood-stained pages of history bear witness to this. The tyranny to which mankind was subjected to in the name of God via the hands of these divine wardens, the portion of poor Satan would not have been even a tiny fraction of this. 12.4 Theocracy. This political system is called theocracy, which was especially promoted by Christianity. Discussing Christianity, Viscount Samuel writes, Christianity has supported the doctrine, divine right of kings and must bear responsibility for all the evil consequences of that doctrine in the history of Europe. This was to maintain own rule by different ruses. Contrary to this, it also happened at times that in some tribe or nation the individual who possessed the greatest physical prowess, or the one who had acquired the most material power, would take rule into his own hands by overpowering and suppressing the rest. 12.5 Might is right. A little reflection will make this truth glaringly evident, that this doctrine of government continues to be prevalent from the beginning till today. Variations in the forms, appearances, and causes and means keep occurring, but the principle everywhere remains the same, that might is right. This happened during the era of ignorance and barbarism of man and is still happening in the era of civilization and development today. When those individuals possessing intellect and vision, who kept a close eye on affairs, understood the reason why the need for a collective system arose in society and what advantage was being taken of this, they tried to reorganize, according to their judgment, the system on correct lines. 12.6 Theory of contract. They stated that the citizens of a society should decide through mutual agreement what the rights and duties of the individuals in the state will be, and what the duties and liabilities of the government will be. The ratification of these rights and duties between the parties should be agreed via a contract. This doctrine is termed as the theory of contract. This doctrine was continuing since Greek times, but in the 18th century in Europe, Hobbes, Locke, and Rousseau especially promoted it. The foundation of modern democracy is based on this doctrine, i.e., government through the mutual agreement of the people. 12.7 Sovereignty. The second question which arises in the case of the political system is, who should have final authority in deciding matters? This is called ultimate authority or sovereignty. When the reins of power were in the hands of religious priests or kings, this question did not even arise. In our times dictators have replaced kings, therefore this question does not arise in the case of their rule either. Religious priests, king, or dictator, are themselves sovereign. But when the form of government became democratic, then this question acquired importance. According to Rousseau, sovereignty is shared jointly by all the people of a state. But according to Locke, this sovereignty should belong to the majority of the people, and democracy has adopted this same principle. Contrary to this, the doctrine of Marx is that sovereignty belongs to that class which has control of the sources of production. In the capitalist system it will be the capitalist class, and in the communist system it will be the labor class. In our times, the doctrine of democracy has acquired great significance and most among the developed nations have adopted this system. 12.8 System of democracy. As we have seen, the basis of this doctrine is on the following assumptions. In this form of government, no difference remains between the ruler and the ruled. In this, the principle is government of the people, by the people, for the people. The will of the people can be determined through their representatives. The criteria for right and wrong in any matter is based on the majority decision of these representatives. The minority has to accept the decisions of the majority as correct. This is that system of government which man has reached after centuries of his experiments, and according to Western thinkers, a better system than this is impossible to conceive. This system is considered a blessing and guarantor of thousands of benedictions and benefits. Those who support it are declared witnesses of truth and benefactors of humanity, and those who oppose it are considered to be criminals. The question is, whether after practical experiments in the West, this system of government has in fact been proven to be such, or have those thinkers and philosophers reached a different conclusion. Thinkers and scholars here refers to the politicians and higher officials of those countries wherever democracy is established as a system. 12.9 The failure of democracy. In his book, The Crisis of Civilization, Professor Alfred Cobbin of London University, discussing the causes of the decline of Western civilization, says, considering politics in terms of actual facts and not of abstract theories, it must be acknowledged that the identification of ruler and the ruled, assumed in the theory of the sovereignty of people, is a practical impossibility. The government is one set of people and the governed another. Once society has developed beyond the smallest and the most primitive communities, they never have been and never can be the same. The pretense that they are can only lead to the worst excesses of power in the state. Professor Ewing of Cambridge University has discussed democracy in his book, The Individual, the State and World Government. The following quotation from the book shows the trend of his thought. Had Rousseau written now, and not, as he did, prior to any experience of democracy in the modern world, he could not have been so optimistic. A similar view has been expressed by another thinker, René Guénon, in his book titled, The Crisis of the Modern World. The relevant passage, though long, deserves to be quoted in full. If the word democracy is defined as the government of the people by themselves, it expresses an absolute impossibility and cannot even have a mere de facto existence in our time any more than in any other. It is contradictory to say that the same persons can be at the same time rulers and ruled, because, to use the Aristotelian phraseology, the same being cannot be in act and in potency at the same time and in the same circle of relations. The relationship of the rulers and ruled necessitates the joint presence of two terms. There could be no ruled if there were not also rulers, even though those be illegitimate and have no other title to power than their own pretensions. But the great ability of those who are in control in the modern world lies in making the people believe that they are governing themselves. And the people are the more inclined to believe this as they are flattered by it and as they are in any case, incapable of sufficient reflection to see its impossibility. It was to create this illusion that universal suffrage was invented. The law is supposed to be made by the opinion of the majority, but what is overlooked is that this opinion of the majority is something that can very easily be guided and modified. It is always possible by means of suitable suggestions to arouse in it currents moving in this or that direction as desired. Before proceeding, it is necessary to understand this fact again, that the weakness of the democratic system which these thinkers are criticizing so severely, is the assumption of this doctrine, i.e., the unconditional and unlimited right to legislate, that the people are holders of sovereignty, and that this right of the people is implemented through the majority of their representatives. In other words, according to this doctrine, this is assumed as fact that whatever laws are drafted by the majority of the representatives of the state are the collective decision of all the people of the nation, and that they are based on truth and fact in every respect. According to these thinkers, this is the fundamental weakness of this doctrine and the cause for ruin. In this regard, Mencken writes in his book, Treatise on Right and Wrong, under all such failures there is a greater one. The failure of man, the most social of all the higher animals and by far the most intelligent, to provide himself with anything, even remotely described as good government. He has made many attempts in that direction, some of them very ingenious and others sublimely heroic, but they have always come to grief in the execution. The reason surely is not occult. It is to be found in the abysmal difference between what government is in theory and what it is in fact. In theory it is simply a device for supplying a variable series of common needs, and the men constituting it, as all ranks of them are so fond of saying, are only public servants. But in fact, its main purpose is not service at all, but exploitation. 12.10 Investigation by UNO. In 1947, UNESCO, the cultural organ of the UN, set up a research committee in order to study and report in a scientific manner on the working of the democratic system in different countries. The committee obtained articles on democracy from the great scholars and thinkers of the world and published them in the form of a book. All shades of opinion were represented in the volume, which was published under the title, Democracy in a World of Tensions. The very first question posed by this committee was, what is the meaning of democracy? In response, it was admitted that this word was extremely vague and to date its precise sense has not been determined. A few went so far as to call it one of the most ambiguous words in current usage. The next question asked was, is the majority vote always correct, and a protest against it is a protest against democracy? The answer was, it does not, however, imply that the judgment of the majority is inerrant. And it, therefore, allows freedom to minorities to agitate and vote for the reversal of previous majority decisions. p. 504. What we have written so far in the previous pages against democracy does not mean that in our view the different systems of government which are presently established in the world are any of them better than the democratic system. Not at all. What we wish to say is that the best system which human intellect has devised throughout all its history has been shown by experience to also have failed badly. This failure is, in reality, not the failure of democracy. Nor does it mean that according to these thinkers and scholars, or in our view, that dictatorship or monarchy are successful systems of government as compared to democracy. The real cause of this failure is that ideology which is called the secularization of state. This ideology means that whether it is a king or dictator, the majority of a democratic parliament, or the president of a state, they have absolute right of legislation, they can formulate whatever type of law they wish. Whenever they wish, they can alter or revoke it and implement another law in its place. In this freedom of theirs there is no constraint. There are no such immutable limits which they cannot cross. There is no external criterion to evaluate the rights or wrongs of their legislation. This is the fundamental reason for the cause of the failure of whatever system of government human intellect has devised up till the present time. And while this fundamental reason remains, no system of government will be successful. 12.11 What harm does this cause? The question arises that, if there is no permanent criterion to judge between right and wrong, and the decisions made by the majority of the representatives of the state become the laws of the nation, what harm results? This question needs profound attention indeed. In this connection, first of all bear in mind this reality, that whether it is the common people of a nation or their representatives, and whether these representatives are in the majority or minority, they will in any case be human beings, and whatever weakness one man can have, this can be present in a group of men as well. Therefore, it is impossible to imagine, and the one who assumes this deceives himself, that a majority of representatives will become free from those attractions, desires, inclinations, and feelings which makes the limbs of a man shake. In the words of Lord Snell, governments are always composed of men who share the general imperfections of mankind, with the result that they can never be more noble or more enlightened than are the human beings who administer their laws and shape their policy. Aldous Huxley makes the same point in his book, Science, Liberty, and Peace, when he says, "There has never been a time when too much power did not corrupt its possessors. And there is absolutely no reason to suppose that in this respect, the future behavior of human beings will be in any way different from their behavior in the past and at the present time. Therefore, if the majority is also given the authority to legislate without any limits or restrictions, then the rights of other human beings can never be safeguarded through its hands. This will certainly be the fate of the people living within the boundary of the state itself. But as far as the human beings of other nations are concerned, they will not even be considered to be human. The beginning of human social life commenced with divisions into tribes. A tribe was in actual fact the name for the extended form of a family, but the consequence of this differentiation and division was that one tribe became bloodthirsty in relation to another tribe. The fire of mutual rivalry and conflict would keep smoldering among them and would spark at the slightest provocation. Then it also used to happen that some tribes would join together, and in this way the warring groups would become wider. No matter how much progress mankind makes in other fields, from the point of view of this division and fragmentation, it still stands today at the same juncture where it was during this era of ignorance. Today, man is still divided into those tribes, with the difference that the tribe is now called a nation. In some places, a nation is based on the sharing of race, and in others on sharing the same state, i.e. people of one race or one nation belong to one group, and people of another race or nation belong to another group. If this division and differentiation had been merely for administrative purposes, even then it could have been tolerable. But the same rivalry and enmity is present between different nations which used to be prevalent between different tribes, in fact far more deep and intense than that.
Professor
Cobbin's remarks on this point should be noted. Nationalism is a feeling which is born out of hatred and lives on enmity. Nations become aware of themselves by their conflicts with other nations, and their feelings of hostility do not cease with the completion of national unity. No sooner has a nation asserted its own right to self-determination than it sets about oppressing other nations that make the same claim. For all these reasons it may be concluded that nationalism is a very dangerous foundation for a state. Friedrich Hertz, the historian of nationalism, writes as follows in his book, Nationality in History and Politics. History shows us that for the greater part the quarrels between several nations had scarcely any other occasion than that these nations were different combinations of people and called by different names. To an Englishman, the name of a Frenchman, Spaniard, or an Italian raises, of course, ideas of hatred and contempt. Yet the simple name of man, applied properly, never fails to work a salutary effect. In his book, New Hopes for a Changing World, Bertrand Russell has expressed the view that in the present age, the thing which stands in the way of social contacts extending beyond the limits of the nation, and which therefore poses the most serious threat to the human race, is the cult of nationalism. But the irony is that every man accepts that the nationalism of other nations is a very evil thing, but that the nationalism of his own nation is a very good thing. A fundamental difference also between the tribal division of olden times and the national division of modern times is that nationalism is no longer just a political ideology but has adopted the form of a belief system instead. Though it is understood as if the West has removed the garb of religion and discarded it, and has now become totally irreligious, it has not become devoid of religion. It has converted its religion, now its religion is nationalism. In the words of Aldous Huxley, nationalism has taken on the form of an idolatrous and pagan religion. Such a religion which is so powerful in the manufacture of chaos and division in humanity, that no monotheistic religion can compete with it for the welfare and unity of mankind. Nationalism or racist sentiments are indeed the dogma of the insane. Huxley's comment on this is worth noting. Nationalism leads to moral ruin, because it denies universality, denies existence of a single God, denies the value of the human being as a human being. And because at the same time, it affirms exclusiveness, encourages vanity, pride, and self-satisfaction, stimulates hatred and proclaims the necessity and rightness of war. Huxley makes the following remarks at another place. 20th century political thinking is incredibly primitive. The nation is personified as a living being, with passions, desires, susceptibilities. The national person is superhuman in size and energy, but completely subhuman in morality. Ordinarily, decent behavior cannot be expected of the national person, who is thought of as incapable of patience, forbearance, forgiveness, and even of common sense and enlightened self-interest. Men who in private life behave as reasonable and moral beings become transformed as soon as they are acting as representatives of a national person, into the likeness of their stupid, hysterical, and insanely touchy tribal divinity. This being so, there is little to be hoped for at the present time, from general international conference. A thought-provoking passage by Adam de Hegetus is quoted below. At the bottom of these two wars, there was the same anarchic division of the world into sovereign independent nation-states, which by their very nature, are forced to compete and conflict with each other and are unable to create a mutually healthy economic organization. The worst feature of this situation is not so much the recurrence of war as the absence of peace. 12.12 Motive of patriotism. The outcome of nationalism becoming a religion is that patriotism has been declared to be the highest virtue and the patriotic motive a great value. The slogan of this religion is, "Whether my country is right or wrong, I will support it regardless." Rumlin, Chancellor of Tübingen University, wrote in 1875 that the state is autarkic. Self-regard is its appointed duty. The maintenance and development of its own power and well-being. Egoism, if you call this egoism, is the supreme principle of all politics. The state can only have regard to the interest of any other state so far as this can be identified with its own interest. Self-devotion is the principle for the individual. Self-assertion for the state. The maintenance of the state justifies every sacrifice, and is superior to every moral rule. Professor Jode makes the following comments. The practical effect of idealist theory in its bearing upon the relations between states is, therefore, to create a double standard of morality. There is one system of morals for the individual and another for the state, so that men who, in private life, are humane, honest and trustworthy, believe that, when they have dealings on the state's behalf with the representatives of other states, they are justified in behaving in ways of which as private individuals, they would be heartily ashamed. Now just see that when the situation is such that human beings of the world are divided into different nationalities, every nation is concerned only about its own interests, not only concerned with protecting its present interests but also to accumulate as many interests as possible, and there are no such limits and restrictions according to which transgressing in order to achieve one's objective could be considered immoral, then what will be the state of the world? This reality is in fact the product of Machiavellian ideology which, at this time, dominates the West and, also in following the West, is spread throughout the world. That doctrine according to which Machiavelli advises the ruling class. A prince being thus obliged to know well how to act as a beast must imitate the fox and the lion, for the lion cannot protect himself from traps and the fox cannot defend himself from wolves. One must, therefore, be a fox to recognize traps, and a lion to frighten wolves. Those that wish to be only lions do not understand this. Therefore, a prudent ruler ought not to keep faith when by so doing it would be against his interest and when the reasons which made him bind himself no longer exist. And his follower, Frederick II, who invariably acted on its principles in his dealing with other rulers, wrote in his political testament as follows. The great matter is to conceal one's designs and to cover up one's character. Policy consists rather in profiting by favorable conjunctures than in preparing them in advance. This is why I counsel you not to make treaties depending on uncertain events, and to keep your hands free. For then you can make your decision according to time and place, and the conditions of your affairs, in a word, according as your interest requires of you. It is obvious that according to this concept of politics, if any thought of following an ethical principle arises in someone's mind, then he will not be considered fit to be in government. It was a belief of Lord Grey that I am a great lover of morality, public and private. But the intercourse of nations cannot be strictly regulated by that rule. This is why Walpole said, no great country was ever saved by good men. Because good men will not go to the lengths that may be necessary. Cavour has summed this view in a nutshell. If we did for ourselves what we do for our country, what rascals we should be. 12.13 Outcome of the discussion. If we wish to summarize what we have written in the previous pages, then it will be as follows. People have to live together. As a result of living together, there is a clash in mutual interests, and conflicts are born from this. The concept of a political system emerged for this purpose, that there should be no clash in the interests of different people, and if there is a clash, then no conflicts emerge. None of the political systems which human intellect has devised so far have been successful in this objective. The last system among these systems is national democracy, but this system is also proving to be failing badly. Firstly, because there remains a mutual clash between different parties within a country, and secondly, the emotions of hatred and rivalry among different countries and nations make the world into a continuous hell. The question is, have Western intellectuals even thought about a solution to these difficulties? And if they have, then what is it, and what are the hurdles in following its path? 12.14 What kind of system Western thinkers desire? We have seen that the fundamental error in the system of democracy is that sovereignty is considered to be in the hands of the people, and the decisions made by the majority of the representatives of the people are considered to be the final word. Discussing this issue, Professor Cobbin says, the traditional justification for the sovereignty of the people is that the government must be founded on either force or consent. And that since force cannot make right, rightful government must be based on consent. But this is neither logical nor is it true. The fact that 1 million people consent to an act which is wrong, does not make it any the less wrong. If words have any meaning, the rightfulness of any government's authority depends on its objects and on the way in which it is exercised. A will ought to prevail only if it is a good will. But this is dependent not upon whose will it is but upon its content. Rousseau states that general will always be right, otherwise it cannot call itself general will. If this statement is correct, then there is no question even remaining of majority and minority. When general will can only call itself general will when it says the right thing, then why can it not be said thus, that whatever matter is right according to the moral standard, that is truth, even if not a single hand is raised in its support? Professor Cobbin has proposed moral values as the standard for judging right and wrong, rather than the majority vote. In reality, when Locke presented the doctrine of democracy, he also viewed it as the practical implementation of an immutable law which he interpreted as a natural law. Hence, in this regard he said, there is an immutable law governing the just relations between man and man, independently of any society or state to which they may belong. This natural law would serve like natural rights as a limitation on the absolute rule of governments, however constituted and whatever other ends they may pursue. 12.14.1 Natural Law. Locke put his trust in natural law to guide aright. He argued that people followed the natural law, as long as they lived naturally, and were without culture and civilization. At this time, reason was their guide and not sentiment. Later on, they were guided by sentiment and ceased to live in accordance with the natural law. The revival and enforcement of the natural law was what society needed now. But when we ask how this natural law can be discovered, Locke refers us to the will of the majority. Here he seems to be arguing in a circle. 12.14.2 Locke's mistake. Have you observed how such an eminent thinker is going around in meaningless circles around a central point, like a piece of wood ensnared in a whirlpool? Alarmed at the mistakes of human decisions and the intrigues of vested interests, he cries out, no government has the right to carry on doing whatever it wishes, it must remain obedient to the eternal law of nature. And when he is asked, where is this eternal law of nature to be found, he cannot conceive of anything else other than, this law will be found in the decisions of the majority. This is like standing under a dripping roof gutter to take refuge from the rain. However, we were saying that Western thinkers are now coming to realize this reality, that under the democratic system considering all decisions of the majority as being right in every circumstance, is wrong. For any decision to be right or wrong an external criterion is needed. According to Locke, this external criterion is the natural law. Professor Cobbin calls it the moral standard. 12.14.3 Divine Law. The famous Italian patriot Mazzini, however, puts it in a more definite shape when he says that the principle of universal suffrage was a good thing, inasmuch as it provides a lawful method for a people for guarding against forces of destruction and continuing their own government. However, for a people who have no common beliefs, all that democracy can do is to safeguard the interests of the majority and keep the minority subdued. We can, he adds, be subject to God or to man, one man, or more than one. If there be no superior authority over man, what is there to save us from the subjugation of powerful individuals? Unless we have some sacred and immutable law which is not man-made, we can have no standard for discriminating between right and wrong. A government based on laws other than God's will, he continues, produces the same result whether it is a despotic or a revolutionary one. Without God, whoever is in authority will be a despot. Unless a government conforms to God's law, it has no right to govern. The purpose of government is to enforce God's will. If a government fails in its purpose, then it is your right and duty to try for and bring about a change. In other words, it means that according to Mazzini, the criterion for right and wrong should be the divine laws whose implementation is the duty of a government. It is obvious that these divine laws can be availed from religion. 12.14.4 Divine laws cannot be obtained from Christianity. But in the words of Professor Jode, the state of the religion, Christianity, which is prevalent in Europe, is such that Christianity places man's true life not in this world but in the next. While the next is wholly good, this world is conceived to be, at least to some extent, evil. While the next life is eternal, life on earth is transitory. For man's life hereafter, this, his present existence, is to be regarded as a preparation and a training. And its excellence consists in the thoroughness and efficiency with which the training is carried out. Nothing on the earth is wholly and absolutely good, and such goods as earthly life contains are good only as a means to greater goods which are promised hereafter. The Spanish scholar Dr. Falta de Gracia writes, "The notion of justice is as entirely foreign to the spirit of Christianity as is that of intellectual honesty. It lies wholly outside the field of its ethical vision." Professor Whitehead writes, "As society is now constituted, a literal adherence to the moral precepts scattered throughout the Gospels would mean sudden death." Dorsey, the historian of civilization, has asserted that today millions of people feel that Christianity is the religion of the defeated. They accept the religion but admit solemnly its defeatist spirit. Nothing is satisfactory in life, they argue. Desire for satisfaction is wrong and satisfaction of wrong desires is sin is a slogan which makes a true and healthy life impossible. It destroys humanity. It is obvious that from this kind of religion those divine laws could never be obtained which Mazzini had declared as the immutable criteria for right and wrong. There was no other way now for Europe to solve their problem except to knock at some other door. 12.15 Declaration of Human Rights. The same is the case with other religions, both in the East and the West. It is, in fact, futile to seek in religion the divine laws for a standard of absolute right and wrong. Religion itself is man-made. In these circumstances, modern man, a frustrated, helpless, pitiable soul, had perforce to seek objective standards outside the field of religion. He turned for help to the UNO. The UNO appointed a commission to state and define the fundamental rights of man. On the basis of the recommendations of the commission, in 1948 the UNO published its famous Declaration of Human Rights. This document listed the basic fundamental human rights. The UNO asked its member states to guarantee them to all their subjects and to regard them as sacred and inviolable. The declaration was hailed as the biggest achievement of the modern age. It was hoped that governments all over the world would, in future, desist from encroaching on these rights of man. This hope, unfortunately, has not been fulfilled. UNESCO, an organ of the UNO, had circulated a questionnaire on the draft of the proposed declaration. The answers to the questionnaire have been published with an introduction by Jacques Maritain. His view is that, rights, being human, should have some limits imposed on them, and be regarded as liable to amendment and change. p. 15. John Lewis, the editor of the Modern Quarterly, London, is equally outspoken in his criticism of the Declaration. He writes that it is mere fiction that human rights are absolute or inherent in human nature and came into being before man began living in an organized society. p. 51. Gerard, a professor in the University of Chicago, writes that the Declaration is an attempt to determine the proper relationship between man and society and that the rights cannot be viewed as unalterable for all times. p. 20. This means that man did not even have the satisfaction that he would continue to receive on a permanent basis whatever he had achieved after so much effort and struggle, and that there would be no kind of modification or change in it. For the protection of rights, Maritain has written that it is not a question of defining human rights. Rather, in the problem of unity of agreement in their application in daily life, the first condition is to agree on the criteria for values. For the respect of human rights, it is necessary that the concept of human life should be common for all people. This is what is called the philosophy of life. p. 17. This same reality is expressed by Professor Joad in these words. I suggested that the good life for the individual consists in the pursuit of certain absolute values. If I am right. If. That is to say, it is by the pursuit of values that a man develops his personality. We may add that the object of the state is to establish those conditions in which the individual can pursue absolute values and to encourage him in their pursuit. We are thus enabled to establish a principle of progress in society, which is also a standard of measurement whereby to assess the relative worths of different societies. 12.16 In search of the permanent values. In other words, the whole discussion has finally reached this conclusion: that the solution to this problem of human society can be nothing other than that the mutual matters of human beings be resolved according to the permanent values and that these values should serve as the criteria for right and wrong. This is that final destination at which man has arrived after thousands of years of his failed experiments. But even after having reached this destination, man stands perplexed and confounded, because he cannot know from where he can find these permanent values. Through their intellect they try to figure out some values, but one is contradicted by another. Come. Let us now see what solution Islam offers for this extremely important and difficult problem of mankind. We have already stated that the whole structure of the Islamic system is raised on this foundation: that man is not only defined by his body, but other than his body, he has been bestowed with a self as well. Every human child is endowed with this human self at the time of its birth equally. This very thing is what makes man worthy of respect and dignity. Because of this, every human child deserves equal respect just due to the fact of being human. In this, there is no question of caste, race, parents, status of family, etc. The revolutionary declaration of the Quran is: verily, we have honored every child of Adam. 17:70. This means we, Allah, have created all children of Adam, human beings, equally respectable. According to this, no man has superiority over another man from the point of view of being a human being, and nor is any man inferior to another man. This is the first and fundamental principle of Islam. The fundamental trait of a self is also that no self can become the tool for another self or serve as a means to fulfill another self's objectives. From this it is obvious that when every human being has been bestowed with a self equally, and no self can be the tool of another self, then no human being can either be the subject and slave of another man or subservient. The second fundamental concept of the Islamic system is that no human being has the right to enslave another human being. The Quran states, "It is not right for man that Allah should give him the book of law, power to judge and even messengerhood, and he should say to his fellow beings to obey his orders rather than those of Allah. He should rather say, Be you faithful servants of Allah by virtue of your constant teaching of the book and your constant study of it." 3. 79. The question is that when, according to the Quran, no human being has been granted the right to rule over another human being, then is its purpose that no system of government be established in the world? That man should live a life of anarchy? Not at all. The Quran establishes human society according to laws and procedures, and teaches how to live life according to these. It states that no man has the right to rule, only Allah has this right. The command is for none but Allah. 12. 40. Only Allah has the right to govern and He does not include anyone in His rule. 18. 26. But Allah is a transcendental reality, we can neither see Him nor hear His voice. So how can we have our matters adjudicated by Him? How can we espouse His rule? For this, He has directed that His rule will be established by following those laws which He has preserved through the revelation in the Quran. Say, shall I seek for judge other than Allah? When He it is who hath sent unto you the book, explained in detail. 6. 114. Since these laws are not formulated by a man or a group of men, their obedience is therefore not the obedience of man. Furthermore, because these laws are equally applicable to all men, no man, no matter how high his position, can remain out with their jurisdiction. Hence, in an Islamic system there is no distinction whatsoever between a ruler and the ruled. What is commonly called the government or state is, in the Islamic system, nothing more than the machinery to implement the divine laws. Now let us proceed. We have seen that man is defined by his body and his self. In the human body, there are changes taking place every moment, therefore its requirements also keep changing. But the human self is unfamiliar with change. External changes do not affect it. It always remains changeless. Since the Islamic system fulfills the needs of man as a whole, it is therefore a mixture of change and permanence, i.e. it is a mixture of elements of permanence and capacity for change and modification. In the words of Iqbal, the ultimate spiritual basis of all life, as conceived by Islam, is eternal and reveals itself in variety and change. A society based on such a conception of reality, must reconcile in its life, the categories of permanence and change. It must possess eternal principles to regulate its collective life. For the eternal gives us a foothold in the world of perpetual change. But eternal principles, when they are understood to exclude all possibilities of change which, according to the Quran, is one of the greatest signs of Allah, tend to immobilize what is essentially mobile in its nature. It is for this purpose that the Quran has given those principles which satisfy the unchanging requirements of the human self. These principles remain unchanged forever and are the ones which are called the permanent values. The word of your sustainer does find its fulfillment in truth and in justice. None can change his words. The permanent values. For he is the one who hears and knows all. 6. 115. The proclamation of your sustainer has been completed with justice and truth. There is none to change his proclamations. Permanent values and principles. Because these principles are not the creation of some blind nature but are precisely defined by him who hears and knows all. These immutable principles, or permanent values, are those boundary lines which no one has the authority to transgress. The Quran gives freedom to man of every era to devise sub-laws for himself according to the specific requirements of his time while remaining within the four walls of these principles. These sub-laws will keep varying with changing circumstances, while those principles within which these will be framed will always remain immutable. These subclauses will be settled through mutual consultation of the representatives of the Ummah. 42. 38. To this extent the Islamic system will be the mirror image of democracy. The Quran does not argue with the machinery of consultation. It just gives this principle. According to this, any kind of machinery can be devised or adopted depending upon the prevailing circumstances of the time, and that will be right. We will discuss in further detail in a later chapter. As to what type of immutable principles or permanent values these are. At this point it is important to clarify this much. That when an individual decides to live under the system, then he will know with certainty and without any doubt that whether people come and go, government forms, or dissolves, no one will be able to make any change or modification in these principles. Similarly, other nations of the world will also have complete surety and security that this nation will never overstep these principles. Today the state of the world is such that, if there is a presidential election in the USA, or the death of a head of state in Russia, the heart of the whole world starts palpitating because it is unknown what the policy of the new ruling party will be. This is because they do not hold such principles which are immutable. Even their constitution can be changed. But in the Islamic system, a change in government, or the death of a person in a position of the highest responsibility, cannot affect state policy in any way. This policy remains within the confines of these permanent values which are determined not by man but by Allah, and which no one has the authority to change. In this system, the authority to formulate a constitution and legislation is not unlimited, it always remains within the boundary of these principles. That is why, in this system sovereignty only belongs to the Book of Allah, which is the last, complete, and immutable code of life for the whole of mankind. 12.17 Concept of global humanity. Now let us look at the second pillar of the political system, i.e. nationalism, which has made the world into a hell. The fundamental concept presented by the Quran is that humanity is an indivisible unit and the division of it into different parts is the greatest of crimes. This concept of the oneness of the Creator is the foundation stone of Quranic teaching and its system. It has announced to the whole world, verily, the whole of mankind is one Ummah. 2. 213. Remember, the whole of mankind is one Ummah, one nation, one universal brotherhood. The example of its creation and the beginning of life in it and its resurrection is like that of one person. And your creation or your resurrection is in no wise but as an individual self. 31. 28. The great aim of the teaching which was continuously revealed from Allah was to maintain the unity of mankind. Those who oppose this teaching are charged by the Quran with the greatest crime of all, and who sunder what Allah has ordered to be joined. 2. 27. That which Allah had ordained to be kept united, they shatter into pieces. 12.18 The practical program of the Quran. The great beauty of the Quranic teaching is that it not only presents concepts and principles, it also puts forward a program to shape these concepts practically. The beginning of the practical program which it has given for the unity of mankind is referenced from the time of Abraham. The Quran tells us that the different nations of the world had built their own individual national houses. Similarly, different religions had established their own respective centers. Nowhere in the whole world was there such a house which could be called the center of universal humanity. Therefore, for this purpose Abraham was asked to lay the foundation for such a center which could be declared as the house for global humanity. In Surah Al-Imran it is noted, the first house appointed for men was that at Bakkah, full of blessing and of guidance for the whole of mankind. 3. 96. It is a reality that the first house which was made for the good of all of mankind, which was this very Kaaba, was constructed in the abundant land of Makkah and was to serve as a lighthouse for the guidance of the whole of mankind. Its fundamental aim was, whoever enters it attains peace and security. 3. 97. whosoever comes within its protection, is secured from all the dangers of the world. It is obvious that by house is not meant a house made of mud and bricks. From this is meant such a universal system which is established for the welfare and development of mankind. The tangible center of this system is the Kaaba. In the same way that, for example, a flag, throne, capital city etc. are the symbols of a state, similarly the Kaaba is a symbol of the central status of the divine system. These things are declared by the Quran as Sha'ir Allah, symbols of Allah. Hence, when it was said that the Kaaba is declared as the house for mankind, by this it was meant that Allah gave the concept of such a system which should encompass the whole of humanity. In another verse, it is stated, "Remember we made the house a place of assembly for men and a place of safety." 2. 125. This also makes it clear that by Kaaba is meant the system which is shaped on the fundamental concept of the unity of mankind. In these verses, the Quran has stated that whichever human being comes under the protection of this system, he will be at peace from every kind of danger. Though there is no doubt that being protected from dangers is not a small blessing by any means, it is nevertheless a negative aspect. The Quran goes a step further and states, Allah made the Kaaba, the sacred house, so that it becomes an asylum of security for men. 5. 97. Allah made the Kaaba as a house worthy of respect so that it can become the center for establishing humanity. This means that the next characteristic of this system will be that as a result of this, the whole of humanity will become capable of standing on its own feet. No human being in the world will be dependent on another human being for their needs. This is clarified further in Surah Al-Hajj. The center of this system will have the status of an open city and every human being of the world will be able to be its citizen. Which we have made open to all men, equal is the dweller there and those from outside of the land. 22. 25. After the construction of this center, Abraham was told, "And proclaim the Hajj among men." 22. 27. You should make an announcement to the whole of mankind, that people should gather at this place so that their disputed matters are resolved through reason and logic. This is the very meaning of Hajj. And then it is stated, that they witness the benefits for themselves. 22. 28. And that they see their good in front of them in concrete form. The nations of the world create their own centers for the protection of their national interests, but the center of the divine system is made for the good of the whole of mankind. There is an open invitation to gather in this center extended to all. And that they see their good in front of them in concrete form. The nations of the world create their own centers for the protection of their national interests, but the center of the divine system is made for the good of the whole of mankind. There is an open invitation to gather in this center extended to all. Hajj thereto is a duty men owe to Allah, those who can afford the journey. But if any do not accept this invitation, Allah stands not in need of any of his creatures. 3. 97. It is incumbent on the whole of mankind that whoever among them has the wherewithal to reach here, they should do Hajj of this house for Allah. It is an open invitation, but for the one who does not accept this invitation, the loss will only be his, there will be no loss to Allah. Allah is free from all needs from his creation. It is also obvious from this that in inviting the whole of mankind there is no hidden self-interest of the system itself. This invitation is to the whole of mankind for the benefit of all, for their protection and preservation, and to devise solutions and to formulate a program for this purpose. 12.19 For the sake of humanity. But there is one condition in this, and this is a fundamental condition, i.e. that those who are participating in it should also not come with any idea of self-interest in their heart. They should come with the motive of good for the whole of mankind. The Quran has termed this great truth using the word lillah. For the sake of Allah. In another verse it is stated, fulfill these gatherings for Allah. 2. 196. For Allah means the completion of the program which is prescribed by Allah in the Quran for the welfare and development of mankind. If in the hearts of all those who are participating there are interests of a nationalistic, tribal, or some non-divine program, then this participation will no longer be lillah. This will become shirk. Associating other systems with the Quran. Not Tawheed. Oneness of Allah. This is why it is made clear in another verse that if there is to be participation in the center, being true in iman to Allah, and never assigning partners to Him, His system. If anyone assigns partners to Allah, he is as if he had fallen from heaven and been snatched up by birds, or the wind had swooped like a bird on its prey, and thrown him into a far distant place. 22. 31. In other words, removing all feelings of selfishness from your heart, and cutting yourself off from all directions, face straight towards Allah and gather here, and do not let not any other motive come near. On this basis, it is stated in Surah Al-Tawbah, O you who believe! Truly the mushrikeen are impure. So let them not, after this year of theirs, approach the Masjid al-Haram. 9. 28. And the announcement of this was also made, for the very first time, at the gathering of Hajj itself, so that mankind becomes informed about this decision. And an announcement from Allah and His Messenger, to mankind on the day of the great Hajj, that Allah and His Messenger dissolve obligations with the mushrikeen. 9. 3. If, after this proclamation, a representative of any nation participates in this gathering with intentions of malevolence and harm to others, then not only will he be thrown out but he will also be severely punished for this. And any whose purpose therein is evil or wrongdoing, them will we cause to taste of a most grievous penalty. 22. 25. 12.20 Global Community. Did you notice what the first characteristic of the Quranic system is? This system is established for the complete benefit of universal humanity, rising above and beyond the concept of divisions into groups based on nationalism, tribalism, race, language, or religion, etc. Hence, the Quran states about that Jamaat of Mu'mineen, group of believers, through whose hands this system is established. You are the best of peoples, rising from mankind, enjoining what is right, forbidding what is wrong, and having iman in Allah. 3. 110. In Surah Al-Baqarah it is firstly stated that the Kaaba has been proposed as a center of your system, and after this it is stated, thus have we made of you an ummah justly balanced, that you may be witnesses over mankind. 2. 143. And in this way, we have made you an international ummah, i.e., such an ummah which is equidistant for all of humanity, so that you can be a witness on the conduct of all men, and that your messenger, center of the system, is a witness on you. From this ummah will attain the imamate of mankind. Just like Abraham, I will make you, Abraham, an imam for mankind. 2. 124. From these explanations, it is clear that the duty of the Muslim Ummah has been declared to be to shape such a system in which the permanent values defined by Allah can be implemented practically within human society. And in this way the caravan of humanity is directed, prosperous and joyous, to its intended objective. Hajj is a segment in the practical program of this system, in which the Muslim Ummah invites all those nations who are willing to participate for this aim, that they should gather in the center of this system and provide practical evidence for the tasks of welfare and development for mankind. In this way, the Quran keeps broadening the paths of its universal system, so that the whole earth shines with the light of its sustainer, and the earth will shine with the glory of its sustainer. 39. 69. 12.21 Religious freedom. Have you noticed how the Quran keeps referring to an-nas, mankind, in this system from the beginning to the end? This is the first system in the world which is proposed for the universal good of mankind. The need for this system arose because had not Allah checked one set of people by means of another, there would surely have been pulled down monasteries, churches, synagogues, and mosques, in which the name of Allah is commemorated in abundant measure. Allah will certainly aid those who aid His cause. For verily Allah is full of strength, exalted in might. 22. 40. From the above discussion, this reality has become clear to us that the Quranic system is the system of universal humanity which takes us out of the narrow spheres of nationalism, tribalism and religion into the boundless environment of universalism. This is why the giver of this program, Allah, is called Rabbul Alameen, sustainer of the worlds. 1. The messenger through whom this system was revealed is called Rahmatul Alameen, blessing for the worlds. 21. 107. And the book of this system is called Zikrul Alameen, eminence for the worlds. 6. 91. 12.22 Justice, Adal, and balance. Ihsan. The structure of the Quranic system of government is erected on the immutable principle of justice and balance. The Quran has stated, Allah commands justice, the doing of good. 16. 90. The meaning of Adal is to accord someone his full rights, and Ihsan means to fulfill someone's need or compensate for a deficiency, i.e. in this system no reduction will be made in someone's rights under any circumstance. But if such a situation arose that despite giving someone his right, there is still a need which remains unfulfilled, then meeting this need will be the duty of the Quranic system. The word Adal is very comprehensive. It does not merely mean justice through courts, its meaning covers all aspects of the sphere of life. In this regard, the Quran has detailed two principles. Firstly, that no bearer of burdens can bear the burden of another. 53. 38. In other words, it will not be the case that a crime is committed by one person and its punishment is suffered by another. That responsibility belongs to one person and is shouldered by another, the duty belongs to one person but it is carried out by another. This will not happen in this society. Nor that effort is made by one person and its reward is taken away by someone else. In this society, every individual will receive that for which he makes an effort and for which he takes action. And secondly, that man can have nothing but what he strives for. 53. 39. In the case of ADL, there will be no differentiation of us and them, be they friend or foe, Adal will be done to all. In Surah Al-Ma'idah it is stated, let not the hatred of others to you make you swerve to wrong and depart from Adal. Justice. 5. 8. So much so, that even if the decision of Adal goes against your own self, even then you should do Adal. O you who believe, stand out firmly for justice, as witnesses to Allah, even as against yourselves, or your parents, or your kin, and whether it be against rich or poor. For Allah can best protect both. Follow not the lusts of your heart's desires, lest you swerve, and if you distort justice or decline to do justice, verily Allah is well acquainted with all that you do. 4. 135. The duty to establish ADL on this system has the status of universality. In other words, this system is not only responsible within its own sphere for the operation and implementation of ADL, but its responsibility is also that wherever in the world there is injustice and exploitation, it should stand up with all its might and means to counter it. For this, even if it has to pick up the sword, then it must. The Quran states that the sword was made for this very purpose, i.e. to defend truth, haqq, and justice. Adal. In Surah Al-Hadid it is stated, we sent aforetime our messengers with clear signs and sent down with them the book and the balance of right and wrong, that men may stand forth in justice. And we sent down iron, in which is Material for mighty war, as well as many benefits for mankind. 57. 25. 12.23 Permission for war. With regards to war, at another place it is stated that war will be unavoidable till the war ends. Until the war lays down its burdens. 47. 4. With regard to what has been written about war so far, it becomes evidently clear that in the Islamic system permission for war can be given for the following aims. For the protection of the places of worship of every religion. For the establishment and protection of the system of Adalai. To eradicate evil and injustice from the world. To end war itself from the world. With regard to religious freedom, this much further explanation is required that according to the Quran, no kind of compulsion whatsoever can be made in the matter of deen. The Quran has stated, there is no compulsion in deen. 2. 256. This is a clear announcement of the Quran. In fact, the acceptance of some proclamation with the agreement of the heart is called iman. Therefore, compulsion and iman are two mutually contradictory things which cannot be together in one place. No one can be forced inside deen, nor can anyone be kept forcibly inside it. Whoever wishes can adopt deen, and whenever he wishes he can leave it. Let him who will believe have iman. And let him who will reject it. 18. 29. By compulsion in deen not only is it meant that an individual will not be made a Muslim at the point of a sword. The Quran calls it duress even if a matter is forcibly made acceptable by suspending someone's intellect and reasoning. This is the reason that it repeatedly clarifies that we have not given Rasulullah any miracle other than the Quran. Allah says to Rasulullah, will you then compel mankind, against their will, to believe? Have iman. 10. 99. 12.24 Ideological differences. As has been noted previously, the fundamental characteristic of the Quranic system of government is that it views the whole of mankind as one community. Universal brotherhood. Mankind was but one ummah. 2. 213. Therefore, it is against the division of mankind into different groupings. Nations. On the basis of color, race, language, and nationalism. It states the whole world as one nation and all mankind as one unit, and declares only one criterion for the difference between them, i.e. the difference in ideology. In other words, it views all those people in the world who accept the permanent values which are revealed through the revelation as being the objective of life, as part of one nation. No matter which part of the world they are living in and no matter what their race. And those people who adopt a different ideology, contrary to this one, as belonging to the other nation. In Quranic terminology, this is called the division of kufr and iman. It is He who has created you. And of you are some that are unbelievers, and some that are believers. In Iman. 64. 2. According to the Quran, there is no other criterion for nationality acceptable apart from this. But this division does not mean that it considers those people who do not accept this aim, i.e. who are not Momin, as untouchables, not at all. It declares them holders of full human rights and fights for the protection of their rights with all means and force. Regardless of whether these non-Muslims are living within the boundary of the Islamic State or outside it. As has been stated under the subject of system of Rabi'u Bayat. The Quran declares the sustenance and development of non-Muslims to be the fundamental responsibility of the state and in return does not ask for any recompense. The Quran says to them, we feed you for the sake of Allah alone. No reward do we desire from you nor thanks. 76. 9. We provide means of sustenance for you because this is a duty upon us from Allah. We do not wish any return from you for this, not even that you should be grateful to us. The status of that which is called jizya is no more than this, that those non-Muslims, people of the book, In the time of Rasulullah, who wished to remain as only citizens of the state, this was a symbol of their obedience to the system. 9. 29. We have seen that the ultimate objective of the Quran is that there should be one system established in the whole world, and its aim should be the implementation and preservation of the permanent values which were received through revelation for the prosperity and development of mankind. Till the time that such a system is not established in the whole world, and the world remains divided into nation-states, the Islamic system will cooperate with other nations in all matters which are for the good of mankind. Help you one another in righteousness and virtue, but help you not one another in crime and malice. 5. 2. This is also obvious that when the Quranic system declares the whole of mankind as being one community and accepts all mu'mineen of the world as one nation, then the idea of religious sects and political parties cannot even be conceived of within a Quranic state. It declares sectarianism to be shirk. 30. 31-32. And tells Rasulullah that he has nothing to do with such people who create sects. As for those who divide their deen and break up into sects, you have no part in them in the least. 6. 159. According to the Quran, mutual differences are a punishment from Allah. Be not like those who are divided amongst themselves and fall into disputations after receiving clear signs. For them is a dreadful penalty. 3. 105. And remaining protected from this, his blessing. If your sustainer had so willed, he could have made mankind one people. But they will not cease to dispute, except those on whom your sustainer has bestowed his mercy. Rahmath. 11. 118-119. And as far as political parties are concerned, the Quran declares their existence to be a concoction of pharaonic wisdom. Truly Pharaoh elated himself in the land and broke up its people into parties. 28. 4. In this system, there will be one constitution for all, and its principles will be immutable. And according to this constitution the whole of the Ummah will establish the system of Adal and Rabu'bayat, for which no illegitimate means or method will be adopted. Its objective will be to make the whole world into one universal community, and by establishing peace among the whole of mankind, its ultimate goal will be to provide the means of sustenance for their realizable hidden potentials. And this is Deen, straight and true. 98. 5. Today, man, plagued by nationalism, is in search of such a religion which can remove its burden from his chest. In this regard J. M. Murray writes in his book, Adam and Eve, if religion is essential for our salvation, it must, first, be a religion which compels from the person an allegiance which completely overrides the claims of nationalism. And secondly, it must be a religion which enlarges and strengthens man's capacity to act as an individual. Western thinkers felt that the solution to this problem lay in the ideology of internationalism. Therefore they first established the League of Nations, and after its failure, the UNO was brought into existence. About this ideology and to what extent its practical steps can be a solution to this problem, Emery Reeves writes in his book, The Anatomy of Peace. We have played long enough with the toy of internationalism. The problem we are facing is not a problem between nationalisms. It is a problem of a crisis in human society, caused by nationalism, and which consequently nationalism or internationalism can never solve. What is needed is universalism. A creed and a movement for creating a system of values which transcends the nation-state structure. Cast an eye once again on what has been written in respect of the Islamic system of politics in the previous pages, and then see that the ideology or movement which Reeves proposes as the solution for the problems of the modern era, where can it be found other than in Islam? F. Hertz elucidates this point further and writes, it is now generally recognized that a mere machinery of international organization cannot work if the right spirit is lacking. But how can this spirit be created or strengthened? The proclamation of general principles obviously is not enough. Neither is it sufficient to lay down that nations must be educated toward that spirit, if a practicable plan and an adequate number of qualified educators are not available. The habit of treating such questions in an unrealistic and perfunctory way is bound to lead to failure, disillusionment, and cynicism. Education towards world citizenship, moreover, is not merely a matter for the schools. It is connected with all the great issues of political and economic life and could be solved if the political nations of the world would adopt detailed plans based on identical principles. This means that, according to him, there is no solution to these problems other than that one type of economic and social order be established in the world. This is that solution which the Quran proposed 1400 years ago when the world did not even have any idea of the concept of global humanity.